Hello everyone. So, my name is Lydia Harper, I am 24 years old, and I have been living with my parents ever since I graduated college 2 years ago. That was never supposed to be a permanent situation. I always thought I would be in and out in a year or so, save up money and get my own place. The plan was simple. Except life as usual had other plans. My mom Sandra, who is 49, and my dad Mark, who is 52, are the type of parents who insist that they love their children equally and never play favorites. Anyone who grew up with siblings knows that is a fairy tale parents tell themselves. My older sister Caroline, who is 28 now, has been the golden child since the day she was born. She was the one who got the shiny new car at 16 while I was stuck driving a rust bucket that broke down every other month. She was the one whose college tuition was completely paid for while I was juggling 2 part-time jobs, classes, and financial aid paperwork. And when she got pregnant at 22, my parents went from quiet disappointment to suddenly parading her around as some kind of hero for giving them their first grandchild. Meanwhile, I was over there patching together shifts at coffee shops, paying for my own books, and still tossing part of my paycheck into the household bills because, as my mom liked to remind me, we are all a family team here. I do not know what kind of team it was, but apparently I was the only one running laps while Caroline got carried around like the star player. Caroline now has 2 kids. Evan, who is 6, and Maya, who is 4. They are cute, yes, but they are also pure chaos personified. I like being the fun aunt. I like being the one who can drop off a bag of candy, play dress up for an hour, and then go home to my own quiet life. What I do not like is being treated like unpaid on-call daycare. Caroline seems to think that every spare moment I have is hers to claim. She never offers to pay me, never stocks snacks or diapers for her kids at our house, and actually has the audacity to say, "Well, you live at home rent-free, don't you think this is a fair trade?" What trade? She decided to have children. I did not. There was no trade agreement. I am not the third parent in this situation. For months I had been quietly swallowing the resentment, mostly because I did not want to start a family war. My parents are the kind of people who would bend over backward for Caroline, and I always knew if I pushed back too hard they would take her side. But that Friday night was the breaking point. I had somehow managed to get both my jobs to give me the evening off, which was a miracle in itself. I had been planning this night for weeks. A chance to finally see my friends and feel like a 24-year-old instead of a live-in nanny with no life. I was sitting in front of my mirror, putting on eyeliner, listening to music, and actually feeling good for once when my mom barged into my room without knocking. She had that harried look she gets whenever Caroline calls her, and she said, "Lydia, you'll need to watch Evan and Maya tonight. Caroline and Jason are going out." I froze mid-wing with my eyeliner pen still in my hand and said, "No, I am going out too." My mom looked at me like I had just confessed to burning down the house. She said, "You have to. Your sister needs this. She and Jason never get a night to themselves." I set the eyeliner down and said, "I do not have to do anything. They are not my kids. I did not push them out, I did not make them, and I am not raising them." That was apparently the wrong thing to say because my dad stormed in like he had been waiting outside my door for a cue. He said, "If you cannot respect this family, then you do not belong in this house." I laughed because I thought he was joking. He was not. Within 10 minutes I had a duffel bag of my things thrown at me, my mom glaring like I had betrayed her personally, and my dad pointing toward the door. I stood outside on the front lawn, eyeliner wing crooked, mascara running, looking like a raccoon that had just been served an eviction notice. Here is the thing. I was angry, humiliated, and shaking, but I was not devastated. In fact, underneath the shock there was this strange sense of freedom bubbling up. No more feeling guilty for saying no. No more walking on eggshells because I did not want to upset the family dynamic. No more being roped into Caroline's chaotic life. I pulled out my phone, called my best friend Jenna, and told her what happened. She said, "Get your butt over here." And within 30 minutes I was in her apartment, sitting on her couch, sipping a glass of cheap wine while she handed me a plate of pizza rolls. I looked around her cozy little place with its mismatched furniture and string lights and thought, this is better than anything I had at home. Jenna listened while I ranted about everything. How I had been treated like a built-in babysitter for years, how Caroline got everything handed to her, how I was expected to contribute to household bills while still being treated like a child, and how my parents had thrown me out over babysitting. I could feel myself shaking as I said it out loud, because I had been suppressing this resentment for so long. Jenna just sipped her wine and said, "Girl, this is your villain origin story." She wasn't wrong. The first thing I did after moving into Jenna's apartment was sit down with a notebook and a calculator to figure out exactly how much I had been financially supporting that house. It was one of those moments where you realize just how deep the resentment runs, because I had been tossing money at my parents without a second thought for 2 years. Every month since I graduated, I had been handing over $600 toward bills. A number my mom insisted was fair because adults pay their way. On top of that, I was the one doing grocery runs every other week, which easily came to about $250 a trip, especially with Caroline's kids tearing through snacks like tiny locusts. When I added it all up, I realized I had contributed close to $20,000 to that household in 2 years. Caroline, on the other hand, had not paid a single dime. Not for bills, not for groceries, not even for gas money when she visited. And her massive SUV was a gas guzzler that burned through fuel like it was an Olympic sport. I sat there staring at that total and felt something in me snap. If they wanted to treat me like a stranger, I was going to act like one. The first thing I did was go through every service and account I had set up under my name. The family phone plan? Still under my account. I called the provider, removed their lines, and watched my phone light up with missed calls the next day. Netflix? Mine. Hulu, Spotify Family, Disney Plus, all mine. Gone. Even the beloved Costco membership card they treated like a sacred artifact for their bulk toilet paper and frozen dinners? Cancelled. I did not say a word to anyone about it. I just quietly flipped every switch I had control over and sat back, feeling lighter with every click of a cancel subscription button. The first sign of chaos came 3 days later when my mom texted me asking why the Netflix would not work. I ignored it. Then she texted again, furious because the phone bill had doubled now that their lines were separate. When I finally responded, it was with one simple message. Not my kids, not my problem. Jenna and I laughed so hard reading her angry messages that we nearly choked on the Taco Bell we were eating on her couch. It was petty, but it was the kind of petty I had been dreaming about for years. Then I remembered something that made my blood boil all over again. Months ago, when I was still living at home, I had added my parents as authorized users on one of my credit cards. It was supposed to be for emergencies only, something they swore they would never use unless absolutely necessary. I had almost forgotten about it until I saw a recent statement that showed a $400 stroller purchased online. I had not bought a stroller. I called my mom, and she admitted it was for Caroline, who apparently needed a better stroller for Maya. I was livid. I had been working double shifts, barely scraping by, and they were out here treating my credit card like a family free-for-all. That was the final straw. I reported the card as stolen. The fraud department at my bank took it seriously and handled everything. A few days later, I got a call from my mom, crying because the bank was making her pay it all back. She tried to say it was unfair and that it was all a misunderstanding, but I did not feel a shred of guilt. I told her calmly that when you steal from your daughter, you deal with the consequences. It was the most satisfying thing I had said in years. I started realizing how much power I had over my own life, and it was addictive. I stopped answering Caroline's texts demanding babysitting favors. I ignored my dad's passive-aggressive voicemails about family loyalty. I blocked both of them on social media after my mom posted a status about disrespectful children that was clearly aimed at me. For the first time in years, I was living on my own terms, eating instant ramen at midnight in Jenna's kitchen without someone commenting on how unhealthy my lifestyle was, sleeping in on Sundays without being guilt-tripped for skipping church, and not having to clean up after anyone's kids. I will not lie, there was a part of me that felt a little vindictive satisfaction every time I thought about them struggling without my contributions. My mom had bragged for years about how much she loved being a Costco member because she could stock up on everything, and now she was back to paying full price at regular grocery stores. Caroline had always relied on me to watch her kids for free whenever she and Jason wanted a break, and now she had to pay a babysitter or cancel her plans. My dad, who always made it clear he thought I was ungrateful, had to figure out how to cover the phone bill and the extra streaming services now that I was not footing the bill. The funniest part was that none of them had ever actually thanked me for all the financial help I had been giving them over the years. It had become this unspoken expectation that I would just keep paying. The moment I stopped, they acted like I had betrayed them, but I could not bring myself to care. I had spent 2 years funding their lives while being treated like an inconvenience, and I was done playing that role. As the weeks went by, I started feeling lighter, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I was still working both jobs, but now my money was mine. Jenna even helped me find a cheap room to rent through one of her coworkers, so I would not be sleeping on her couch forever. I started saving for a car that did not break down every 3 months. I bought myself things I had been putting off, like a decent mattress and a coffee maker that was not secondhand. Every purchase felt like a small rebellion, a reminder that I was building something for myself and not for people who took me for granted. But as satisfying as all of that was, I knew deep down that this was not the end of it. My parents and Caroline had a way of making everything a drama, and I had a feeling they were not going to take my silence quietly forever. Sure enough, I started hearing from mutual relatives that my mom had been telling everyone I had abandoned my family, and left them struggling. Caroline was apparently playing the victim too, saying she could not afford childcare now that I refused to help, which was hilarious considering she and Jason both had full-time jobs and enough money for fancy strollers and weekend getaways. I was not surprised. This was how my family operated. They made choices, expected me to deal with the fallout, and then painted me as selfish when I stopped letting them use me. The difference now was that I did not care about their narrative anymore. I had spent too long being the one who kept everything together, and for what? So they could throw me out because I refused to babysit? No. That version of me was gone. Every petty move I made was a small act of justice. Canceling the streaming services. Cutting off the phone plan. Reporting the card as stolen. It was not about revenge so much as it was about reclaiming everything they had been taking from me without gratitude. 4 years, I had been the one carrying their financial burdens while they treated me like a live-in maid, a second mother, and a scapegoat. Now they were being forced to live without me, and it was glorious to watch from a distance. It felt good, but oh boy, it wasn't over. Caroline had the audacity to call me one night while I was sitting cross-legged on Jenna's couch, eating leftover pizza straight from the box. Jenna had just poured us glasses of wine, and we were deep in a conversation about which of our coworkers was most likely to survive a zombie apocalypse when my phone lit up with Caroline's name. Against my better judgment, I answered, mostly out of curiosity. She started her lecture immediately, without so much as a hello, telling me I was being dramatic and selfish and that family helps each other. Then she said the thing that nearly made me spit out my pepperoni slice. I owed her for all the time she gave me rides when I was younger. That was it. I laughed, not a polite laugh, but the kind of laugh that escapes when you hear something so absurd you cannot even form words at first. When I finally caught my breath, I told her she was out of her mind and that if she really wanted to talk about debts, I had a whole list she might want to see. I opened my notes app, where I had been keeping track of every time I babysat her kids, every errand I ran for her, every canceled night out because she begged me to watch her angels. I had started tracking it years ago out of habit, but in that moment it became my favorite weapon. I calculated everything as I spoke, rattling off numbers while she sat there fuming on the other end. Over the years, it added up to 1,120 hours. If I charged her a modest $15 per hour, that came out to $16,800. I told her I would send her an invoice, and I did. I opened Venmo, typed in the full amount, and attached a caption that said, "Payment due immediately. Late fees apply." She read it, and within 5 minutes I was blocked. I showed Jenna, and she nearly choked on her wine laughing. It felt good, cathartic even, to put a real number on everything I had done for her. For years she had acted like my time was free, like I should feel lucky to be part of her kids' lives, as if that somehow excused using me as her personal nanny. It was satisfying to see her finally confronted with a number she could not argue against, even if her solution was to pretend I did not exist. Of course, it did not take long for the family group chat to explode. My dad called me the next morning furious, saying I was tearing the family apart over money. I told him that was not true. I was simply showing him the math behind years of unpaid labor, something none of them had ever acknowledged. He accused me of being cold and disrespectful, so I reminded him that they threw me out of the house over babysitting duties. That shut him up for a second before he hung up on me. Then my mom called, her voice soft and full of guilt-tripping sweetness, begging me to forgive and forget, to stop keeping score, to be the bigger person because that is what family does. I asked her calmly if she would forgive a landlord who kicked her out of her home and then stole her money. There was silence on the line, and I could practically hear the mental gymnastics as she tried to find a way to excuse her behavior. She could not. She mumbled something about loving me and then hung up. And I sat there on Jenna's couch feeling like I had just won a silent argument I had been having in my head for years. It was strange, this mix of emotions I was feeling. There was anger, yes, but also this newfound clarity that I had never had before. I finally saw how much I had let myself be used, not just by Caroline but by my parents too. They had conditioned me to believe that family was supposed to mean sacrifice without acknowledgement, that I was supposed to be grateful for a roof over my head, even while I was contributing more than anyone else. For years, I had accepted scraps of appreciation because I thought that was normal. Now, with Jenna laughing in the background and the freedom of my own choices stretching out in front of me, I realized I did not owe them anything. I was building my own life piece by piece. I had managed to save enough money to put down a deposit on a small studio apartment. Nothing fancy but mine. I had started setting boundaries with my jobs, refusing to take on extra shifts just because someone else bailed, and for the first time since college I had weekends to myself. I was slowly cutting the invisible strings that tied me back to my childhood home, and each snip felt like a breath of fresh air. Caroline, of course, was playing the victim. I started getting messages from extended family members, some I had not spoken to in years, saying things like, "You really hurt your sister," or, "Family should be there for each other." I ignored them. I knew exactly who was feeding them those lines, and it only reinforced that I had made the right decision to distance myself. The same people who told me to be selfless had no problem watching me burn myself out for Caroline's convenience. They never saw the late nights I spent watching her kids while she went out, the times I spent my grocery budget on snacks for her children, or the hours I spent doing errands because she was too tired. The narrative they were spinning about me being cold-hearted did not bother me anymore. I had played their game for too long and I was done. This was not about revenge, not entirely. It was about reclaiming the parts of myself I had given away so freely. It was about reminding myself that my time and energy had value. I did not care if Caroline was embarrassed that I had sent her a Venmo invoice. She should have been embarrassed years ago when she started treating me like a live-in nanny without pay. It became clear that there was no going back. Even if my parents begged me to come home, even if Caroline suddenly decided to apologize, I could never trust them again. The bridge was not just burned, it was obliterated. I had spent so long being the one to smooth things over, to keep the peace, and now that I was no longer playing that role, I could see the cracks in our family dynamic clearer than ever. There was no repairing something that had been built on exploitation and guilt. The bridge was torched, gasoline poured, and I was roasting marshmallows over the flames. Here's the grand finale. For years my parents made me feel like I was freeloading by living at home, constantly reminding me that they were doing me a favor. They conveniently ignored the fact that I was paying $600 a month toward bills and covering groceries every other week. They never saw it as rent, only as me pitching in. What they did not realize is that I kept every single receipt, every Venmo transfer, every bank statement that proved I had been financially supporting that household like a responsible tenant. I had even saved text conversations where my mom reminded me to send over my share. At the time it felt like unnecessary record-keeping. Now it was the key to my freedom. 2 months ago, when I decided I'd had enough of couch surfing at Jenna's, I put together an apartment application that could have been used as a case study in organized record-keeping. I walked into that leasing office with a binder, printed proof of consistent payments, references, and a glowing employment history. The leasing agent looked impressed, and for once in my life, I felt proud instead of defensive about my finances. My parents' manipulation had unintentionally turned me into the type of tenant landlords dream of. Last week, I moved into a cute one-bedroom with Jenna as my roommate. It's nothing fancy, white walls, a tiny balcony, and a kitchen that could fit in a shoebox, but to me it feels like luxury. Rent is steep at $1,200, but every time I unlock my own front door, I feel like I'm inhaling freedom. The air in that apartment is different. It smells like steak sizzling on a cast-iron pan, like whiskey poured over ice, like independence. Jenna and I celebrated the first night with cheap champagne and takeout sushi, sitting on the floor surrounded by boxes. For the first time in years, I slept through the night without being jolted awake by a crying toddler or my mom banging on the door asking for help with something urgent. I thought cutting ties would feel lonely, but it didn't. It felt like stepping into sunlight after years of being trapped in a basement. I started decorating the apartment with little touches I never could have had at my parents' house. A gallery wall of thrifted art, a massive bookshelf I'd been dreaming about, and a rug so soft it felt like walking on a cloud. I bought myself a set of wine glasses that matched, a small luxury I'd been putting off because there was always some family emergency draining my wallet. Jenna and I made a pact that our place would be our safe haven, a drama-free zone where no one was allowed to weaponize guilt. Then came the twist of fate I hadn't seen coming. Caroline called me yesterday. Not texted, not sent a vague Facebook message, she called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Her voice was shaky, thick with tears, and she told me Jason had walked out. He left her with 2 kids, a mountain of debt, overdue bills, and no plan. She said she didn't know what to do, and she needed my help just for a little while, until she got back on her feet. The version of me from a year ago would have felt a pang of guilt, would have caved instantly and driven over to help. That girl had been trained to fix everyone's problems. But the person I had become, the one sitting cross-legged on a rug she bought with her own money, in an apartment she secured herself, was different. I thought about every sleepless night I'd spent babysitting for free, every time I skipped meals to make sure there was enough food for her kids, every condescending comment about how I should be grateful for living at home, every time she told me I owed her because she drove me around when I was a teenager. And then I thought about the freedom I'd fought for. So I told her calmly that she was right. Family should help each other. I said I'd send her the number of a babysitting agency that charged $20 an hour, and I hung up. The silence that followed was delicious. For the rest of the evening I sat on that rug, sipping wine from my new glasses and feeling something I had never felt before. Power. Not cruelty, not vindictiveness, but power. I wasn't being petty. I wasn't getting revenge for the sake of revenge. I was finally refusing to let them exploit me, and I was doing it without a hint of shame. Caroline had built her life on the assumption that someone else would always clean up her mess, and for years that person was me. Now she had to face the consequences of her choices without her free nanny and financial safety net. The funny thing is, I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt detached, like I had finally stepped out of a toxic cycle I didn't even realize I was trapped in. My parents' constant guilt trips, Caroline's entitlement, the way they all made me feel like a burden while taking advantage of me. It was all so clear now. I was done being the scapegoat, the doormat, the reliable one who held everything together while getting none of the credit. Jenna toasted me that night, saying I was officially in my villain era. I laughed, but it didn't feel like being a villain. Felt like justice. Felt like balance. It felt like revenge, but not the petty kind, the kind that tastes like steak and whiskey and sleeping in your own bed without a care in the world. For the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't just surviving my family. I was outsmarting them. And honestly, revenge has never tasted so sweet.